Hello, everyone. Welcome to our lecture on lymphatics. The lymphatic system is a little bit of an odd grab bag. So we're going to have some organs spread throughout the body, which are going to house and help create and maintain the various cells that are going to protect us from infection. Now, the other main part of the lymphatic system is this sort of spider web of green tubes, of green vessels. So the second job of the lymphatic system is to drain fluid that is built up in the tissues and return that to our circulatory system. Now, these two functions, immune protection and drainage of fluid, are actually tightly linked. So the way this tends to work is the fluid out in the tissue of the body drains into these lymphatic vessels, which then delivers this material to the immune cells, who then look for evidence of infection. If they find it, they get activated and they take care of the problem. So think of this as a drainage and filtration system. We're draining fluid out of the body, searching it for pathogens. If there are any present, the white cells of the body will attack. Okay, so as I just mentioned, part of the job of the lymphatic system is to return interstitial fluid. So the fluid component of blood was called plasma. And remember that I told you in the section on vessels that capillaries are leaky. They're supposed to leak. A lot of plasma leaks out of capillaries. When they do that, when that fluid exits the wall of the capillary, it is now called interstitial fluid, because it's just fluid in between the various cells and tissues of the body. Now, when that same fluid drains into the lymphatic system, that fluid will undergo another name change and it will be called lymph. So the liquidy stuff in blood, plasma, when that leaks out into the tissue, it's called interstitial fluid. When that stuff drains into the lymphatic system, it's called lymph. Basically the same. There are going to be a few differences. Plasma is going to carry more oxygen, more nutrients. Lymph is going to carry more carbon dioxide dissolved in it, and it's going to have more waste products. Now, another feature that you may not necessarily be aware of is the lymphatic system is very important for the transportation of absorbed lipids. So we eat fat, right, as part of our food, right? That material, the material we'll eat, gets absorbed into our blood supply. Well, what is our blood? It's mostly water. Fats like oils and water don't mix very well. So the lymphatic system plays a very important role in absorbing dietary fats, and we'll talk about that here and then a little bit more detail once we get into the digestive system. So the third point here is the production and maturation of lymphocytes. So cells that are specific white cells that help protect us from infection. We'll talk about those a little bit. And to generate an immune response against antigens. Remember, an antigen was a compound that provokes an immune response. So the lymphatic system of vessels brings the fluid, which contains the antigens, which are floating in the interstitial fluid, to the white cells of the body, who then deal with the situation. Okay, so here we have various components of the lymphatic system. We're going to have red bone marrow, because that is where we're going to make most of the white cells, or are going to originate, or white cells originate in the red bone marrow. And sometimes they go to other lymphatic organs. This organ here called the thymus, which looks like a blob of fat on the heart. T cells are going to go to the thymus. They're going to be created in the red bone marrow, and then they're going to migrate to the thymus for maturation. You're going to see other lymphatic tissues in the spleen and inside the intestines. And of course, we have the network of vessels and lymph nodes that make up the lymphatic system, drainage system. Okay. So extra interstitial fluid drains into lymphatic vessels. Interstitial fluid enters the vessel. It's called lymph. So this network kind of resembles veins in that they're going to have valves, and it will eventually drain back towards the brachiocephalic veins, or just at the union of the internal jugular and the subclavian veins. There the fluid gets returned to the bloodstream. So the smallest structures are going to start at what are called lymphatic capillaries. Notice that this is not connected to anything else. When we looked at the circulatory system, heart to arteries, capillaries, on the other end of the capillaries were veins, which went back to the heart. This is not the case. Here we have closed-ended vessels. We just have like a branching tree, and these just end. They're not connected to anything on the other end, because their job is all these cells in between all these vessels is to absorb this fluid and then return it to the circulatory system. So lymphatic capillaries, only one layer, just tunica intima, closed-ended tubes that have little valves that allow the fluid to enter. So these valves are created by overlapping endothelial cells. Let's cut to the picture to make it a little bit easier. Here we have the various cells and various tissues of the body. They are bathed in interstitial fluid, which is leaked out of a capillary. This fluid needs to be returned, otherwise the tissues in our body will swell up pretty significantly. So what we see here is through just movement or compression of the tissues, you get a slightly higher pressure in the tissue than inside the vessel, so the fluid flows into the vessel. The valves then close to prevent backflow, and eventually the fluid starts to drain into larger and larger lymphatic vessels. So if we see how the system integrates with the circulatory system, they're totally interwoven with each other. So here is our capillary bed. We have an arteriole, systemic arteriole, connect to a post-capillary venule, right? We have our meta-arteriole, and it looks like here is our thoroughfare channel. Then we have all of our true capillaries, all the stuff we saw previously. Interwoven into this, we have the green lymphatic capillaries. As fluid leaks out of the capillaries, it bathes the cells. It actually helps deliver the various nutrients like dissolved sugars, dissolved oxygen, not oxygen bound in hemoglobin, but oxygen that has been dissolved in the fluid. How does it actually get to the cells? Through this interstitial fluid. Then it's collected in the lymphatic capillaries and returned. If this fluid is not returned, right, the body will swell up. And there's a particular disease called Elephantiasis, and this is a disease caused by a roundworm, which actually occupies these lymphatic vessels and blocks them up. And what will happen is, particularly the lower extremities will swell up to gigantic size, like that's why they call it elephantiasis, because your leg might turn into something the size of an actual elephant's leg. So this big, terrible disease. It takes a very long time to develop, but it just goes to show that something that most of us are not particularly familiar with is actually very important for healthy physiology. Now, there are special capillaries that help drain, special lymphatic capillaries, which help drain tissues associated with the gastrointestinal system, with our GI tract. And these are called lacteals. So like lactate, lactose, right? So what this has to do is these vessels carry a fluid that has a milky appearance. And the reason why they're milky is because they have lots of emulsified or dissolved fats. So this is how the lymphatic system helps collect, absorb fat from our diet, and then transport it inside the body. It uses special tubes. It uses these lacteals. When you get into physiology, you'll learn more of the details about how exactly these little tiny droplets are created. But for here, I just want you to know that we have a special set of lymphatic capillaries that drain the intestines, and they're called lacteals. And the reason they're called lacteals is because of the fat inside the interstitial fluid. It has a milky appearance, which is why it has the name lacteal. So all this lymph collected from the gastrointestinal tract is called chyle. So lacteals is the structure, chyle is the fluid. Do not confuse this with chyme, which is something that we're going to talk about in the digestive system. chyle is the actual fluid flowing through the lacteals. Okay, let's talk about the particulars of the structures of lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic capillaries, which only have a single layer, are going to fuse to form larger structures called lymphatic vessels. So these are going to have all three tunics: tunica intima, tunica media, tunica externa. They do have valves, so they look very much like veins. Now, these lymphatic vessels will drain into structures called lymph nodes. So what a lymph node is, it's a structure where a lot of these lymphatic vessels all join together, and you can think of it as a little bit like a speed trap. So it's a structure that houses lots of immune cells. They're just going to hang out in the lymph node and wait for all this lymph draining in for the surrounding tissues to bring in signs of infection, to bring in antigens, so the cells waiting in the lymph node can detect it and then take action. And then fluid drains out of the lymph nodes into other lymph nodes or into other structures of the lymphatic system. So that's why we have these two different named vessels. We have an afferent lymphatic vessel and an efferent lymphatic vessel. These are the same afferent, efferent that we saw in the nervous system, except this time afferent means going towards, in this case, the lymph node, and an efferent lymphatic vessel is draining lymph out of a lymph node. So still towards and away, but now we're talking about lymph nodes. So, oh, wrong direction. Okay, I'd like to point out that there is an error on this slide. Here, this is showing you a picture of a lymphatic vessel. Looks very much like a vein. Thin-walled, large lumen, you have valves. This over here is not a lymphatic vessel. This structure over here only has one layer of cells. It only has tunica intima. So what is being shown here is actually a lymphatic capillary, not a lymphatic vessel, which is what has been called here. So just a little bit of typo that the author never caught. Okay. We start out there with lymphatic capillaries. Lymphatic capillaries drain into lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels drain into structures called lymphatic trunks. So larger and larger tubes bringing more and more fluid eventually back to our circulatory system. So lymphatic trunks drain a particular area of the body. So the jugular trunk is going to drain the head. Subclavian trunks drain the upper arm, right? Brachiomediastinal trunk is going to drain the mediastinum. Intestinal trunks drain the intestines. Lumbar trunks, right? That just a lower area of the abdomen. Now, all these trunks are going to drain into the largest structure, which are called ducts. So it goes capillaries, afferent vessels, lymphatic vessels, to lymph nodes, to efferent lymphatic vessels. Lymphatic vessels drain into lymphatic trunks, and lymphatic trunks drain into lymphatic ducts. And the ducts are what are directly connected to the circulatory system. They're going to return the lymph back into our veins, back into our circulatory system. So here you go. On the right side, we have right jugular trunk draining the right side of the head, right subclavian trunk draining the right arm, and then we're going to have the structure here, right brachiomediastinal trunk, right? So bronchiomediastinal trunk, excuse me. So it's going to be draining the deep structures of the chest. All three of these trunks are going to join, they're going to anastomose and form the right lymphatic duct. Duct is the larger structure. Just remember, capillaries, vessels, trunks, ducts. Ducts are what connect to our veins. And you can see that the right lymphatic duct is going to dump its fluid at the union of the internal jugular vein and the right subclavian vein. So that little Y, where these two vessels come together to form the right brachiocephalic vein, that's where you have the right lymphatic duct. Now notice that the right side is only draining the right side of the head, the right arm, and the right center portion of the chest. The whole rest of the body is actually drained by the left brachiocephalic duct. Excuse me, I misspoke. The left lymphatic duct. So it is a little bit different. How does that work? Well, let's take a look. The right lumbar trunk and the left lumbar trunk are going to drain into the structure called the cisterna chyli. So the two lower legs are draining first into the structure, the cisterna chyli, which will also be draining the intestines, thus the intestinal trunk. Cisterna simply means an underground vessel of water. So it's just basically a container for fluid. What's it containing? Chyle, because it's draining the intestines. Remember, the cloudy lymph draining the intestines, carrying the fats, is called chyle. So the intestines and the lower legs drain into this large structure called the cisterna chyli. The cisterna chyli then drains into the thoracic duct, and then the thoracic duct draining will then join with the jugular trunk and the left subclavian trunk, and then it will join with the left side of the internal jugular vein and the left subclavian vein, and return 3/4 of the length of the body to right here at the union or the formation of the left brachiocephalic vein. So if that's a little bit confusing, go to this picture here. Notice on the right side of the body, right, only 1/4 of the body is drained into the right lymphatic duct. The whole rest of the body is drained by the thoracic duct or the left lymphatic duct. Those names are used interchangeably, right? And why is that? Because the intestines and both lower extremities drain into the thoracic duct or the left lymphatic duct. Okay, so lymphatic ducts, I've already explained this. They're formed by the fusion of trunks. I just went over this picture, but the right lymphatic duct is located underneath the right clavicle and returns lymph at the junction of the right subclavian and the right internal jugular vein. Right. Lymphatic or thoracic duct, also called left lymphatic duct, is formed by the getting turned around here. The lumbar trunks, which eventually drain the legs to form the cisterna chyli. Cisterna chyli drains into the thoracic duct. Thoracic duct is then going to drain into the union of the left internal jugular and left subclavian veins. So I said that several times now, so I apologize for the repetition, but this is kind of an important thing to understand. What is the main takeaway here? I'm not going to get super specific here, but if you know your body regions, you should know the major trunks that I'm going to ask. You need to know right lymphatic duct, the thoracic duct. You need to know the major trunks, but those basically are just drained by region. You need to know the cisterna chyli. That's the main takeaway. That's the level of understanding I want you guys to have. Okay, and that brings us to the end of part 1. Next time, we're going to start talking about the various lymphatic cells and a little bit about how they work. Catch you next time.